Hey guys, patch 9.9 for League of Legends just dropped, and I wanted to go over some of the biggest changes in the patch that you might not think are big changes. So without further ado, let's get into the patch. The first change that I want to go over are the Rift Scuttle changes. Right now, Rift Scuttle is spawning at 2 minutes, and that's forcing solo laners to roam to fights that they oftentimes don't really want to be taking. Also, with the Rift Scuttler spawning at 2 minutes, you're only able to get level 2 most of the time before being forced to roam to the fight. Moving it back 75 seconds will mean that solo laners are able to get level 3, while bot lane should be either at level 2 or close to level 3. This changes the dynamic of solo lanes, where before the goal was to get priority in your lane at level 1 and 2. Now you can afford to pick champions that have very strong level 3s. Now, while the Scuttle change does affect laners a lot, it affects junglers even more. Junglers that were going buff straight to Scuttle will no longer be as good due to the fact that they're going to be forced to either gank or clear a second camp before going to a Scuttle. Going buff immediately to opposite side Scuttle will just not be a clear anymore. However, the biggest change is for champions that were clearing red buff into Krugs into Scuttle. This would give those champions level 3 while allowing them to heal up at the Scuttle, and it would allow them to gank with level 3 relatively early on in the game. They're going to have to make a choice on a third camp that they want to do. It will not be seen as viable to do red into Krugs and then walk into the river and wait. Power farming junglers are also a lot better this patch. Oftentimes you could double Scuttle a power farming jungler, however they're going to have a lot more time to clear their camps and they'll have even that much more of an advantage by the time Scuttles spawn. Getting both Scuttles will happen less often as a result of this. It's also very possible that we see more invades on the second buff for junglers and that we transition more into an invade style play. Champions like Lee Sin, who can take a buff and then a second camp and then invade the enemy buff with their level 2, are going to be very strong. Since a lot of champions can't clear 3 camps and still be healthy, it's very likely that most champions will still be level 2 on their second buff. So this is something that a lot of players might look to abuse. I'm going to predict that level 2 junglers are going to become the norm. Champions that can invade and gank with level 2 without requiring level 3 are going to be a lot stronger than the champions who are relying on Scuttle Crab in order to get level 3 and gank. Champions like Lee Sin, Jarvan, Pantheon will all succeed a lot more. There's also the junglers who can clear so much faster and have level 3 advantage by the time Scuttle spawns. These are champions like Shyvana, Hecarim, who can clear their jungle very quickly and are able to take camps like Raptor and Krugs on their first clear without their HP really suffering. The second huge change that's happening this patch is the change to Aftershock. Aftershock is being changed to scale off of resistances now and health, and that's it. No longer is there an AP or AD bonus on the damage portion of Aftershock. Also, the bonus armor and magic resist that you get from Aftershock now relies on the amount of bonus magic resist or armor that you have. It no longer depends on your level. This is huge because champions like Lissandra and Galio will no longer be able to viably take Aftershock and still deal a good amount of damage. It will also benefit the tanks that are taking Aftershock a lot due to the increase in HP scaling on the damage. I think this, in addition to the bone plating buffs, might help tanks out in the top lane a little bit. It also looks like there's going to be a bit of a mix-up in the bot lane, specifically involving supports. There have been a lot of big changes to a lot of different supports, specifically Blitzcrank, Rakan, Soraka, and Tahm Kench. Blitzcrank has had his passive and his R updated. Blitzcrank's passive now scales off of his maximum mana rather than the amount of mana that he currently has. He also has a new passive on his R that will allow for a bit more consistency in the damage that he is doing. Instead of his R passive damaging random targets, he can now mark somebody with his auto attacks and it will guaranteed hit them. Now, while it is a consistency change, they also lowered the numbers on this passive, so it is hard to tell whether or not this is a buff or a nerf. Rakan has received a huge change this patch. You are no longer able to immediately RW. You have to wait half a second after casting your R in order to cast your W. Now, in lower elos, this is not a big deal. A lot of players might not even know that Rakan is ulting or that they are in danger of dying if Rakan presses R, so you'll probably still be able to make Rakan work. However, in higher elos, half a second is a big deal. The higher you get on the ladder, the more impactful this change is. Players will start flashing away as soon as they see Rakan activating his ultimate. Aside from the ultimate changes, he did get some fantastic buffs on just his base stats and his W. His W is faster again, and he received a lot of stats while only losing attack damage, which doesn't really impact him too much past the first 4 or 5 levels. Soraka is also receiving some pretty huge changes. They're moving away from Emax Soraka towards a Qmax Soraka. Typically, Sorakas were taking 3 points in E early in the lane phase in order to bully out their opponents due to it being instant cast. However, this was very unhealthy, so what Riot is doing is they're moving a bit of Soraka's power away from her E towards the Q. Now, Soraka's Q is getting some huge buffs here. While the ability does less damage, it heals for a lot more, and the healing is more skewed towards the initial ticks rather than later ticks. This means that Soraka has more burst healing in her kit in general. She also grants a lot more utility when landing Q. The amount of move speed that she is getting from this ability is tripling. This really helps with her mobility issues in the mid to late game. She's also receiving some quality of life changes on her W and R that just show when she can and can't cast W, and when her R will be receiving the bonus from low HP targets. And her R will now tell you how much her ultimate will heal low HP targets. By far, the biggest change to any support, however, goes to Tahm Kench. While Tahm Kench is also receiving some number changes, the biggest change comes with his W. Tahm Kench will no longer be able to devour an ally and run away with them. He will receive the same effect when devouring an ally as he does devouring an enemy champion. This means that Tahm Kench can't just be played as a champion that stands behind their ADC and keeps them out of danger. While Tahm Kench will still be able to negate damage onto their ADC, they're no longer going to be able to compensate for an ADC's poor positioning. Now, these are some huge changes to Tahm, and I really think that it will push him more into a top laner as opposed to a support. If he doesn't have too much benefit devouring an allied champion to get them out from safety, and he's just going to be another frontliner, then he might need a few more buffs in future patches in order to be strong enough. Tahm also has some number changes on his abilities, however, none of these changes should be too impactful, and we likely will not see too much of Tahm Kench in the support role from this point forward. Another change that I wanted to go over was changes to Kenan. Now, this change appears to be small at first, but they're making E-Max Kenan no longer viable. E-Max Kenan was something that was played into hypermobile champions like Riven in order to get away from them while taking low amounts of damage. This is no longer possible though. Since Kenan no longer gains resistances for using his E, he's not going to be able to lane against these champions as well, and he's going to be forced into a standard Q-Max build. The final change that you might have overlooked is a change to Kindred. Now, this change appears to be minuscule at first. However, anyone who plays Kindred would know that this is a big deal, actually. Since your first mark will always spawn on a Scuttle, when the initial spawn was moved back to 3 minutes and 15, this means that Kindred's first mark is also being moved back. So while she will have 3 abilities for the first mark, it also moves back this mark by an entire minute. This means that you can't get your second mark spawning until 4 minutes or even later. And a lot of the time, past 4 minutes, the enemy jungler is going to be able to full clear their jungle. I think this change alone will probably push Kindred entirely out of the meta. It will be very hard for her to get the marks that she needs, and she will be forced to gank for them a lot more. That does it for the biggest changes in patch 9.9 that you might not have seen. If there's anything that you think that I missed, make sure to let me know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. We produce new content done by challenger players every single day.